Our first guest tonight is a Tony, Grammy, and Emmy award-winning performer, singer, songwriter, and actor you know from the critically acclaimed series The Politician and Broadway's hit show Dear Evan Hansen. His sophomore album, Reverie, is available everywhere now. Please welcome back to the show, Ben Platt. Ben, how are you?
Hey, Seth, how you doing? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, too. It's been 5 years since you were last here, and it was the beginning of the Ben Platt era. It was your first talk show appearance.
It was my first ever late night moment. I was very, very nervous and sweaty. And you looked exactly the same, except maybe like a little more sun-kissed.
Thank you very much for saying that. And I don't know if you remember, but on your way out the door that day, I said, by the next time I see you, you better have an Emmy, a Grammy, and a Tony. And you lived up to it.
And it's only because you said those things to me that any of them happened. So I really appreciate it.
I was fishing for that, and I got you on the hook. So this is really, we've talked when you were here before about how you perform a lot with your family. That was something you did growing up. And, you know, like a lot of us, spent time with family over what was a difficult year. Did you, in 2020, did you spend a lot of time with them? And was that a nice a safety net for you?
It was wonderful, yeah. I moved home when the whole thing started and moved into my childhood bedroom and lived with my parents, which was a brand new experience as a pseudo-adult. I got to write my whole album from there, so I got super inspired by like all of my posters and decor and yearbooks and all of the places that I had been. And I got to like see my parents as people, which I feel like is like this weird transition that happens for all of us as we get older, but it was sort of expedited, I think, for a lot of us during the pandemic, and certainly for me too.
So it sounds like your childhood bedroom is fairly well preserved. Would you describe it as a shrine to Ben's youth?
It's pretty untouched. They didn't necessarily like spruce it in any way, but they also didn't like mess with it or turn it into a gym, which I really appreciate. We got like all my Broadway posters, like Pippin and Carolina Change, and there's a big picture of me and Beanie Feldstein, my best friend from prom. We went together. All of my 2 soccer trophies from when I was like 7 years old. A couple of my bar mitzvah centerpieces, which were also giant playbills. So it's very theater-friendly room. The one thing that I never identified with is that my wallpaper is like a bunch of old like cartography, like it's a bunch of maps. And it was because I went away to camp one summer and my mom was like, as your birthday gift, when you get home from camp, I'm gonna like make your room like a mature and like older because you're going to middle school and like I want you to feel like you're growing up. And I was like, oh, cool, awesome. And then her interpretation of that was to give me like a black comforter and like maps all over the room. So I was like, do you know me at all, Mom? But it's very untouched.
She's like, based on everything you've shared with me, Ben, I believe your future is sea travel.
Exactly, and how right she was.
I think my family and my parents half preserved my childhood bedroom and then added a work desk that has the oldest printer you've ever seen.
Beautiful.
Like they made this decision in the mid 2010s, and yet they somehow found a printer from like the 80s.
Well, I bet aesthetically it's pretty nice looking, at least.
It's beautiful and loud, which is really nice.
That's what you want from your electronics. Yeah, it's really as disruptive as possible.
You mentioned Beanie, and you mentioned having this really strong friend support system last time we talked. When you work on something like an album, does that come into play? Are you lucky to have people to bounce stuff off?
Absolutely, especially Noah Galvin, who is my boyfriend and who I spent most of the pandemic with as well. He getting to play the music for him and let it just be kind of something just for us, for my friends and for my family, and see how much they love it and listen to it in their own lives, like leading up to the release, definitely relieves a lot of the anxiety and worry that comes with putting something out that has so many little personal nuggets and experiences in it that you worry if people will understand or connect to or feel like they see themselves in. So for the people that matter the most to already be kind of listening to it and jamming to it and appreciating it, it makes that feel smaller in a good way.
I can imagine, too, you can constantly tinker with something like an album before you put it out. Do you have now a sense of relief that that part is over and that it's out for people to enjoy?
So much so, yeah. I think like I guess I've only had this experience really one other time when I put out my first album. But of course, in the days leading up to the release, I was listening pretty obsessively and just, trying to really, before you put anything out, I feel like you want to really feel like you know it and you know exactly what it is that's about to be in the world before it belongs to everybody else. Because I find that once it's everyone else's, I'm not as inclined to listen on my own. So it's kind of like soaking up the end of that experience. And of course, I find little nitpicky things. And, as you grow, even since you know, things have been finalized and mastered, you know, things still change in life, and you have new perspectives and new ideas. But in terms of as a snapshot of, you know, when it was made and what part of my life I was in, I do feel it's a good example of that. And I feel very authentically me. So I'm happy with where it ended up.
I imagine you have a whole new relationship with an album when you go out and start touring with it, which you've just announced you're going to do. Is that, I mean, just in general, for someone like you to get in front of an audience again must be exciting, but also to do it with this really personal work must be cool.
Absolutely. I feel like much like any other performer during this, you know, horror 2 years, terrible time, I've been like really just craving that live experience and having that connection with people in the room. And that's what I grew up doing. It's how I started working, and how, you know, my sort of my comfort zone, my favorite place to be. And so, yeah, the idea of, I think always when I'm recording music or putting together an album, in the back of my head, the end goal is always the live experience and the singing live. And so at the end of the day, these are all meant to really be performed. And so I think they only really feel like they've reached the finish line and they're like fully realized when I get to actually sing them for live human beings.
Not, you know, touring is one thing. You know, another that you have an intense relationship with is obviously Broadway. Do you look more forward to being on stage again one day, or just the simple pleasure of being back in a Broadway audience as a, you know, viewer?
Honestly, equally. I mean, I think first I'd love to, like, you know, rip the Band-Aid off by being a patron and an audience member, because that's like my favorite activity in the world. And I think that's like my favorite thing to do, to just, you know, process or anytime I need any kind of relief. When I was living in New York for the last, you know, 8 or 9 years, it was always to try and go see a Broadway show. And I think much like going to restaurants, and just so many things that felt so small or so ordinary to us now feel like little adventures and like roller coasters every time we do them. And I think to the nth degree, seeing a Broadway show is going to feel like this entirely new experience. So I'm very hungry to do that. And then, of course, after that, get back up there myself, for sure.
We're also very excited that you're sticking around to do a song from the new album. Thank you so much for that. And congrats on the album, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me sing for you.